Hunters of Reddit, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? Couple of years ago I was in northern British Columbia on a fishing trip with my dad, uncle and cousins. The lake and river was a 2-hour drive from the nearest city. We were drifting down the river when I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got out of the boat. As I'm doing my business, I look over and see what seems to be the top of a building. I turned to the people in the boat and told them what I saw. Walked towards the building, and realized it wasn't alone. Multiple homes, buildings in the middle of the forest. It was a very small and isolated Native American tribe, and we backed away. Not super creepy, but didn't want to cause any trouble. We continued on without any contact. Copying from a previous thread. In September this year I was hunting antelope out near the Red Desert in Wyoming. I had just shot my antelope and was walking about 150 yards out to where he dropped so I could tag and begin field dressing the animal. I should mention I'm about 40 miles from the main road and I had not seen another human or vehicle since I got off the main road. This area is so extremely remote it's hard to even describe. So as I'm walking out to the antelope I look up and about 1 to 2 miles off in the distance I see this extremely bright light zooming over the landscape and headed my way. I thought it was probably a game warden on a side-by-side coming to check my paperwork and all. No big deal. I keep walking out and find the animal and look up and this light dives down into the sagebrush and I can no longer see it. It was about half a mile from me when it disappeared. I also notice I don't hear any engine if it is in fact someone on a motorized vehicle. I'm mostly confused at this point, not sure what the hell this light is or where it went, but I continue on and tag the antelope. It takes me all of 10 to 15 seconds to put the tag on, then I look up and I see the light traveling away from me now and it's about 3 to 5 miles away from me and going at least 100 miles per hour. It was really zooming way faster than any vehicle could travel over that type of terrain. Also there are no roads or anything where the light is traveling, so I don't know how it was going so fast. I'm pretty spooked at this point. I field dressed the animal as fast as I could and dragged it back to my truck. I just had a very uneasy feeling at this point. I have no idea what that light was, although some others have speculated it was a drone, but if it was a drone operated by the game warden, why didn't he come check me out once I got back to my truck? One of my experiences happened on family-owned land in North Carolina where I used to live. I still hunt, so it never kept me from going again. We called it the noise. To this day if you ask people who live or lived adjacent to the land about it, they know exactly what you are talking about. Whatever it is was very loud and very fast. It was like a very loud primal scream. First time I heard it I was hunting with my dad and brother. We were stalk hunting and very slowly and methodically moving through the forest. I noticed everything had gotten oddly quiet. Only thing you heard was the water running over the rocks in the creek. My dad stopped us and said to hold still and not to move. As soon as we stopped it screamed behind us. It was so loud it made my ears ring. My dad never showed fear and was always rational. He looked very nervous and I'm ready to shit on myself. My brother has his gun shouldered looking around trying to spot it just to see what it is and make sure it isn't close. Then it screams again. Now it seems closer and in front of us. My dad puts his hand on my shoulder and just says, "Run for the car now." I jump up like a scared rabbit and run as fast as my legs will carry me. We are all running and we can hear this thing screaming as we run, like it's keeping pace easily. I can see the gravel road ahead and know the car is close. It lets out another scream that sounds like it's to my left now and very close. I bolt right and we all come sliding out onto the road about 100 yards above the car. That's when I hear this weird whistle from the woods and then everything just goes back to normal. Birds chirping away, squirrels calling, crows cawing. We stopped to catch our breath and uneasily walked to the car ready for anything. 100 yards never seemed so far away. That wasn't the last time I heard it. In fact, I have more stories that involve the noise. If anyone wants to hear about them, I will gladly share. My family tried to find it for years to figure it out. When we thought we were close, it would be somewhere else. Even trained hunting dogs ran away from this thing. Weird stuff, but I still love to hunt. The way I figure, if something gets me while I'm hunting, at least I'm doing something I love, and being close to nature, I harvest her bounty and thank her for it. One day my body will feed her and the animals I hunted. I go out river fishing and tend to find some pretty remote spots. Usually really pretty scenery and just trying to bring in a fat trout. However, there have been a few times I've been pretty spooked. 1. I parked my car by the river and entered in. No footprints or anything in the muck, so I knew the spot hasn't had any activity. When I was done and came back, I exited at the same point I came in. There was a fresh boot print next to mine. No car near mine, and it's pretty quiet with the road close by. I would have heard something, I figure. 2. Smells. Sometimes I'm walking and I just smell something way out of place, like someone plugged in a strawberry glade thing. Do some flowers smell insanely sweet? No berries in sight or anything. Sometimes the smell even just goes away. 3. The smell of marijuana, but I don't see anyone around. Makes me think they can see me. Probably harmless, but it makes me uneasy. Someone can see me and I can't see them. I usually just keep walking and find a new hole. 4. Sounds. Trees creak and groan. Then, I've heard buzzing, but not like a bee's nest. Just a buzz sound. Power lines? I'm not sure. 5. Finally, the realization that I didn't tell anyone I'm out here, and if I injure myself or drop my phone in the river or my keys, I'm screwed. Usually I'm not that far from a house, but there have been times that I'm way out in the country and there's nothing around. Like it's so easy to step wrong or into a deep hole or shit you don't want to lose that $10 lure you cast once and it's snagged. People fish nearby areas because first they are easy access, but second people can find you far easier if you mess up. Oh, I guess not really creepy but more funny. I'll see a random sock or shoe. Sometimes women's underwear, and on the rare occasion a condom. Used. When I was younger, I used to horsepack around Northern California for weeks at a time. This was during the late 70s, early 80s. I rarely used a compass, but I always had a map of my area. I'm pretty good at dead reckoning via landmarks, and I've never been lost in my life. Except once. I was in the Six Rivers National Forest, heading south towards Trinity County. This is very rough terrain, lots of high ridges, steep hills, rocks everywhere, and nasty brush to tangle you. I was riding the ridges, heading generally south, and trying to find easy places to cross to the next ridge when it became convenient. The skies were partly cloudy, and it was cool 60°F. Cold for that time of year, since it was early August, and the temps were normally 90+F during the day. I found a reasonable spot to cross over to the next ridge south of me and started down. When I got into the ravine, it turned out that what looked easy from above was actually a rocky nightmare. I started walking up the ravine to find an easier place to get out of there. A wind picked up, and it started drizzling. I walked for a mile or so, couldn't find anything that I wanted to risk my neck on, and more importantly, my horse's hooves, and decided to start up the side I had come down originally. I got to the top, took a look around to orient myself, and froze in shock. The landscape was completely different. I don't mean that it was lower or easier or less rocky. I mean that all of my landmarks were gone. Some of them were peaks that were 30 to 40 miles away, others were a lot closer. It was completely different. I had no idea where I was, and I was completely disoriented. I dug out my map, and started to review where I was, the angles on the hills I had been navigating by earlier, etc. I couldn't find anything that matched. The only thing that I could positively identify was the route up from the ravine that I had just come up. Since it was cloudy, I couldn't navigate by the sun. All I had were the landmarks that I used for dead reckoning, and those were gone. The wind was picking up, and it was getting very, very cold. I almost expected snow. I had no idea where I was, so I decided to backtrack to my last known position and see if I could pick up where I left off. I started down a hill, got to the bottom of the ravine, and started the opposite direction up the ravine. This time I was very careful, watching for signs of my passage before, and the hill I came down in the first place. It stopped raining, the wind died down, and the day started to warm up. I found my original trail down the hill, started back up, and got to the top. All the landmarks were there now. I was totally confused. I kept going on the ridge, watching carefully to find where I had come up before. When I got to the spot where I thought it should be, there was no sign of it. I cast back and forth for a while, trying to find my trail with no success. All of my landmarks were there to see. Eventually, I gave up and continued on the ridge. A bit later, I found an easy trail down, and an easy trail back up the other side, and continued on my way. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Even though it was drizzling, I should have been able to see the closer landmarks, and honestly, the further landmarks were big enough to see. To that point, thinking back on it, there was no sign that it was drizzling when I continued on to where I had ascended the first time. And the temperature swings were wild that day. Easily 30–40 F. Not uncommon in the mountains, but really odd for that time of year in that place. Another thing. Originally, I had chosen to descend at that point because there was nothing to prevent me from going up the other side. I could see easily from the ridgetop. But when I arrived, there were tons of boulders blocking me that I should have been able to see from top. Eerie and creepy. At the time, sure, but I was more focused on trying to orient myself. But thinking back on it, even more so now. There is a place near where I come from that has all the hallmarks of an excellent hunting area. Nobody goes there because there is a stand of giant Douglas fir trees that are at least 300 years old, and there are boots hanging by their laces, dozens of pairs, all hung in the very top branches of the trees. It's practically impossible for a human being to have done this, and nobody has a reasonable explanation for it. Even the most seasoned hunters will tell you to stay the hell away from there. After helping my dad and brother quarter a big bull elk in the middle of nowhere, I went up the hill first because I had the lightest load. I figured I'd get my quarters to the top and then go back down and help my dad with the chest cavity. It had just stopped snowing, and when I was resting at the top of the hill, I glanced down and saw paw prints in the snow, that had no snow in them. I knew based on the size it was either a wolf or mountain lion, but after looking closer I realized I just saw pads on the foot and not nails/claws making a mark in the front of the print. This meant I was definitely looking at the tracks of a big mountain lion who had been 50 yards from us as we worked on the elk. My dad was at the bottom of the hill, I had a front quarter on my back, and a hind quarter on the sled I was pulling behind me, and no gun. I knew it was just 3 of us and I'd be around my dad the whole time, who was armed, so I didn't bring an additional firearm. I was a walking buffet standing right where the cat had been a few minutes before. There's no question he was looking at me. I calmly set the quarters down and made my way down to my dad. He agreed that I should have done what I did and even joked about it, saying at least our load won't be as heavy when we get back up there. I bet he took the front quarter. We got back up the hill and my quarters had been untouched, with no additional cat tracks around it. All 3 of us were paranoid as hell walking back the 2 miles to the truck, not knowing if at any moment the cat might decide he was hungry. We made it back home just fine and laughed about the whole thing as we were cleaning and butchering the elk. I grew up on the New Mexico reservation. I'm white, my stepfather is Navajo. Anyway. It's really rocky desert, mountain-like area. Like the Grand Canyon but smaller. No white people go out there. The Navajos back then really hated white people. You can walk all day and never see anyone. I was on my horse hunting and came to this circle-like depression in the sandstone and sand like someone made it a long time ago. There was no sound from animals around it, no lizards on the rocks, no bugs. It was scaring the crap out of my horse. He was screaming, jumping, kicking, and I couldn't get him to calm down. So I got him away from there and tied him up to a pinyon tree in sight. I went to check it out with a weapon, of course. It was just a big circle about a foot deep and it looked like something was built there but very very long ago. I came back with friends and their horses and dogs. The horses did the same thing and the dogs just stayed on top of the hill whining. No one had any idea what it was, but when we told our parents we were told to stay away from it. The only thing I could find out was that the Navajos and other Indians would put people and children who could not contribute to the tribe in a pit-like circle to die from the elements. A long time ago, if you were crippled or mentally challenged and couldn't hunt or farm, no one was going to support you or take care of you. In the 70s and 80s growing up, I had hours of chores every day even though I was going to school too. Exploring out there was amazing. I've seen things that no one would believe. My buddy and I decided to do a Halloween ride up a supposedly haunted trail at night. As we were making our way back to the main road, I see a car parked to the right side of the trail with the lights on. I thought it was kind of weird that I would see a sedan parked in a dirt road so far out in the middle of nowhere. We pull ahead of the car and stop our bikes. When we looked back, there was nothing. No car. Just darkness. I could see how wide my friend's eyes were from inside his helmet. I asked him if he saw a car parked to the side. He said yes. Then I got the most uncomfortable chilly feeling and my eyes began to water. I felt like I was going to cry and I felt every goosebump on my skin. I remember the sound or the lack of it. No animals, no insects, I just heard the ringing in my ear. My friend told me that we had to leave but I couldn't move. I think I was in shock or something. He told me again and this time I heard the fear in his voice. He sounded like a little kid. We both hopped on our bikes and rode as quickly as we could back onto the main road. Climbed up a tree before daylight in a remote holler in southern Ohio. Just as it was light enough to see, shooting light we call it, I hear a rustling coming down the hill, maybe 150 yards away. Cruising toward me is what I can only describe as a Tasmanian devil-like whirl of brown and grey moving in a straight line along the ground at high speed down a sloped hill and then off a steep 15 drop-off and then under my tree and then through the thickest brush imaginable behind me where the creek was, and then eventually out of sight and audible range. So I observed maybe 300 yards of travel, although lost visual in the thicket, which all occurred in a very straight line at supernatural high speed. I'm in a perch with nothing else to do but put my entire focus on it and still I can't figure out what it is, and as it passed under me all I see, again, is a ghostly blur of grey and brown and leaves. Total time elapsed was less than 10 seconds. I've seen dozens of coyotes and several bobcats and yes, that is probably what this was. But its movement was so out of the ordinary at that moment my senses computed that it couldn't have been either of those. I got tingles and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It's a mundane story but the actual experience definitely felt supernatural. Went hunting with my cousins in Michigan once long time ago when I was 13. They lived there and went hunting quite often. My only vision of hunting was what I'd seen in PG-13 movies and the game duck hunt. We saw deer and they told me to go ahead and take the shot. I didn't hit him quite good. Or so I thought. When we got closer we saw that I hit him in the lower back. There was a lot of blood and he was in a lot of pain for the few seconds before my cousins put him down. Looked nothing like it did in the movies and that image stuck with me forever. It's not like I'm a vegetarian now or anything, but just seeing that was quite surreal and makes you take a hard long thought about animals and their pain they endure because of humans, not through hunting but through farming and whatnot. Was camping on a reservation and walked up to the lake from the campground. It was a 20-minute walk to the lake. To the left there was a destroyed and decaying elevated wooden path through a dead swamp and to the right the pipe from the water station at the lake. When we got to the lake all the animal noises had stopped. The lake was tannin-stained and pitch black. The trees were all burned or dead and the dock was floating, not attached to anything. We went on the dock and while I stayed on the dock, the other two went and took the shitty one or rowboat out into the water. Whole time absolute silence and my gut screaming danger. It took them a while to paddle back to the dock but they were freaking out too. So we hightailed it out of there, and once we were halfway back we left the silence and immediately heard birds. I took a few steps back and it was basically silence. Few steps forward and birds. Not exactly an encounter, but creepy nonetheless. There are Bigfoot sightings and reports around the time I was there though, so who knows. I do a fair amount of archery hunting when the weather permits and trap rabbits about 3 times a year. I release them if they're pregnant. I used to be a vet technician and just, nah, can't do it. Baby bunnies are cute, sue me. But I think the craziest thing that ever happened was I was following some deer tracks, had been tracking the herd for a couple days, not planning on bagging one, I just like to observe. So I'm hauling around a tree stand and my tent and bare essentials. Before my pup got cancer I would bring her, but she's in chemo so it was a solo trip. I generally let her tell me when I wasn't noticing something, but without her it got fairly creepy pretty quick. I notice I'm losing the light and rub my face in frustration. And I'm suddenly waking up. I was just laying down, with my tent and everything all set up. Firewood under me, ouch, and a rip in my jacket, nothing else to show for it except that it was way darker than before. I check my watch. I've got roughly 3 hours to sunrise. When who set up my tent. They did it differently than I normally do. Okay, it's kinda just oilcloth and rope. I travel light, but it wasn't in my usual formation. The zippers on my pack were all open. I was grasping my sheathed field blade in my left hand. I'm right-handed. To this day it unsettles me. One winter when I was homeless in college I had a mouse crawl into my tarp hideout. It was pouring down buckets. It practically swam to get under the tarp and it just sat there gasping and shivering. I gave it a cracker and it sat with me. I eventually fell asleep for a few hours. When I woke it was gone, but a little pile of grass and a twig with a berry on it, poisonous unfortunately, was where the mouse had been. Kinda always thought of it as a thank you. I once heard a fucking screech from hell. For a couple of days I was nervous because I thought that I encountered something supernatural, but it was this. I might not sound like much, but in the dark as you heard that screech move from a tree to another, disturbing the leaves, I thought I had been followed by some sort of Wendigo. When I was 15 I was hunting in the Colorado Rockies for elk. We were about 12 to 15 miles up a mountain, no cell service, nothing. I had been up there 2 times before this incident took place. I was out with my uncle when we heard a woman scream. Curious and a little frightened, we decided to head to check it out. We were hiking over a ridge for about 10 minutes when we saw bloody clothing, a t-shirt and shorts, nothing else. No footprints or anything to indicate whether the scream had gone. We hightailed it back to camp and began to pack up, it being our last 2 days. We packed out the next day and went to the ranger service, gave them the location of the scene, and that was it. They asked a few questions and said they would follow up with us. We never heard anything.